They say a rooster crowing is God's wake-up call. Yeah, at least that's the way it was for me. Everything that whole night was a blur, all right? I didn't comprehend, none of us could comprehend everything that was going on, all right? We were all in the upper room, Jesus was washing our feet, then we were in the garden, Jesus goes off to pray by himself. I fell asleep. I'm not proud of it. I had a big meal. Bread makes me sleepy. Next thing we know, me, James, and John, Jesus is in our face, and he's trying to wake us up. And he said, the flesh is weak, the spirit is willing. And then before we know it, Judas is kissing Jesus on the cheek. I try to go help him. I cut off this guard's ear. For the record, I wasn't aiming for his ear. I'm a fisherman, not a swordsman. And then they arrest Jesus and they take him off. And we ran. And it wasn't but 2 hours earlier that we were in the upper room. I was looking at him. I was looking him right in the eye saying, if everyone disowns you, Jesus, I won't. I'm with you. I love you. And I think that's what made me stop, turn around, go back. And I caught a glimpse of Jesus as they were taking him to the high priest's house. Stood at the gate, and some girl comes up to me, starts pointing at me, starts going, you're with him. You're with this man that claims to be the Son of God. You're one of his disciples. I felt like every eye was on me. So I just brushed her off. I said, you don't know what you're talking about. You got the wrong guy. I get my way into the courtyard, and it's cold. I try to warm up by the fire. And then there's this guard that recognizes me, and he is from the ear incident, and starts going, get him, he's with him, just arrest him, get him. And I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about, all right? I wasn't with him. It was easier the second time to deny him. It was sometime right before morning, and this wise guy, he comes up to me and goes, who you kidding, all right? Who you fooling? You're with him. I can tell by your accent. I'm like, this is just the way I talk, all right? And the whole night, they kept pushing him around. They kept beating him. They kept spitting on him, throwing insults at him, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had enough. I was tired of people accusing me, looking at me, and I said a few things that I'm not proud of, but I was like, leave him alone. You don't know what you're doing, all right? Just leave him alone. I wasn't with him. And that's when I heard the most blood-curdling sound I ever heard in my whole life. I heard that rooster crow. And at that moment, Jesus, he turns around and he looks at me. He looks at me. And his gaze, you can't escape his gaze. I mean, when his eyes are on you, you cannot escape it. And they arrested him and they took him off. I will die with you, Jesus. If everybody disowns you, I will die with you. What a joke. I mean, what would you do? At that moment, at that time, I ran. I ran so fast, I ran so long. And you know what they did? They killed him. He's dead.
Please join me in our call to worship from Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. Let us worship God.
Who suffered there for me, and from my smitten heart with tears to wonders I confess the wonders of redeeming love and my unworthiness. I take, O cross, thy shadow for my abiding place. I ask no other sunshine than the sunshine of his face, content to let the world go by, to know no gain nor loss. My sinful self, my only shame, my glory, all the cross.
Please join me in our litany of assurance. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, let us hold fast to our confession. We have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. We have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. We have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered and became the eternal salvation for all who obey him. We have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin. The Roman governor, Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23. The first light of dawn crept over the hills around Jerusalem, and pale glimmers of light shone through the trees, but in the streets it was still dark. No one stirred, and none of the pilgrims from Galilee who were camped around the Mount of Olives guessed that Jesus had been arrested. The soldiers changed Jesus and marched him through the streets in strict silence, keeping the shutters down on their lanterns. Behind them walked a crowd of chief priests and teachers of the law in grim silence, thinking of how they could accuse Jesus in front of Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate was a cruel man, and he had executed thousands of Jewish rebels in the past. He would show no mercy to Jesus if they could prove that he was an enemy of Caesar. But Jesus carried no sword, had no army, and did not tell anyone to fight the Romans. Meanwhile, Judas went to the temple, carrying the 30 silver coins. "I have betrayed an innocent man," he cried, but he could not undo what he had done. He ran to the temple sanctuary. He threw down his 30 pieces of silver. They spun through the air and clattered onto the cobblestones. Then he ran out of the city of Jerusalem, stumbling through the dawn mist to a lonely meadow. There, Judas, the disciple who had betrayed his Lord and Master, took a rope and hanged himself. The soldiers arrived with Jesus at the gate of the fortress, where Pilate had been summoned to meet the priests and the city leaders with their mysterious prisoner. Jesus, the Roman governor, walked around the silent figure before him curiously. "What is this man's crime?" he asked. "He tells the people not to pay taxes to Caesar," lied the religious leaders. But Jesus said nothing to defend himself. "He says he is the Messiah, our king," one of the priests shouted out, pointing furiously. "A king?" Pilate studied him carefully. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus stood still and stared into Pilate's eyes. "These are your words," he said quietly. Pilate was troubled and afraid. Something about this man was very disturbing, but he did not understand what it was. He certainly did not look like a criminal or a rebel who would lead an uprising. "There is no case to be tried," answered Pilate. Then all of the enemies of Jesus started to shout out, "He has been stirring up the people all the way from Galilee to Judea. He is a dangerous rebel." Pilate raised his hand and they fell silent. "A Galilean? Then let him be tried by Herod, the ruler of Galilee. Take him away."
The trial before Herod, Luke 23. King Herod had come to Jerusalem for the Passover and was staying in his magnificent palace. When he heard that Jesus was being sent to him, he was thrilled because he thought that this would entertain his guests. Perhaps he could persuade Jesus to perform a great miracle. But when the prisoner was brought before him, tightly bound, standing silently in the great marble hall, Herod was disappointed. Jesus looked so ordinary, so weak. He had heard many stories about this brilliant teacher who healed the sick and even raised the dead. "You're supposed to be a prophet or some great magician," Herod said as he strode around him. "Well, show me your great powers then. Let's see a miracle or two." Jesus said nothing at all. even though the king kept asking him questions, urging him, walking around him and making sarcastic comments. "You're a king? So show me your powers." The priests shouted out their accusations again. "Liar! Blasphemer! Rebel!" Then Herod called his servants and told them to dress Jesus in a rich purple robe. "Let him look like a king," he said with a sneer. When Herod and all his courtiers had finished mocking Jesus, he was sent back to Pilate. The death sentence. Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, John 19. When Pilate heard that Herod could not find Jesus guilty of any crime, he was deeply disturbed. Jesus stood before him once again silently. His eyes seemed to gaze into Pilate's soul, and the Roman governor shifted away from the prisoner hastily. "Don't you realize that I have the power to crucify you or to set you free?" "You would have no power over me if it hadn't been given to you from above," said Jesus, breaking his silence and troubling Pilate even more. From above? What did he mean? Pilate did not believe in one God, but in many gods, and the only power he understood was the power of the Roman Empire, of Caesar and his armies. Was Jesus talking of another power? Jesus was looking at him without fear of death, and it was Pilate who was feeling very afraid. I do not find this man guilty of any crime, Pilate shouted in desperation. But by now, a large crowd had gathered in the street below. Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify your king? Pilate leaned over the balcony. Why do you want to kill your king? We don't have a king, they shouted back. Our only king is Caesar. You are no friend of Caesar's, the religious leaders said, cleverly turning the blame onto Pilate, if you do not sentence this man to death. Pilate looked at the crowd, at Caiaphas and the priests, then at the still, strong figure of Jesus. Each year at the time of the Passover festival, the Roman governor would release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. I can set Jesus free for you now, offered Pilate, but the crowd screamed out, Barabbas! Barabbas! Set Barabbas free! Barabbas was a murderer and a rebel who was in prison under sentence of death. Barabbas the murderer? We want Barabbas! Crucify Jesus! Crucify him! Crucify him! At last, Pilate could stand it no longer. In front of the crowd, he took a bowl of water, washed his hands, and said, Look, I am washing myself clean of all guilt. This man's death has nothing to do with me. Then he handed Jesus over to his Roman soldiers for crucifixion, ordering that a sign saying, the King of the Jews should be put on the cross. Don't put that, the chief priest protested angrily. Just put, this man said, I am the King of the Jews. What I have written, said Pilate, and stormed away from them in fury.
Throned upon the awful tree, Lamb of God, your grief I see. Darkness veils your anguished face, none its lines of woe can trace. None can tell what pangs unknown hold you silent and alone. Silent through those 3 dread hours,
The crucifixion. Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, and John 19. The soldiers took Jesus into their courtyard, shouting and jeering at him, pushing him and shoving him, spitting in his face. They stripped him and flogged him. Then they put his purple robe onto him and twisted a crown out of sharp thorns. They pressed it onto his head so the blood ran down his face, and bowed down to him, laughing, "King of the Jews, hail, mighty King." All this time, Jesus stood there alone without saying a single word. Finally, the soldiers led Jesus out into the streets, where they placed a heavy crossbeam on his back and whipped him forwards. Jesus struggled onwards, stumbling and falling. Then the soldiers seized a man from the crowds named Simon of Cyrene, who was visiting Jerusalem for the Passover festival. They forced Simon to pick up the cross and carry it instead of Jesus. So Jesus walked on, followed by Simon with the cross, all the way to the place of execution, Golgotha, which was a skull-shaped hill. In that lonely place outside the city walls, the soldiers crucified Jesus, watched by the priests and the religious leaders, and by the crowd which had followed the procession out of the city. The followers of Jesus watched in horror as Jesus was nailed to the cross beside two thieves and hauled up with ropes. They heard his cry as the cross fell into the socket. Then there was silence and the sound of the wind that was rising, hurling clouds through the sky. The three crosses stood, dark silhouettes against the fading light of the sun. The priests turned to each other and said, "If he is the Son of God, let him come down now. If he is the chosen one, the Messiah, why doesn't he prove his power?" "Yes," said one of the thieves, grimacing in his pain. "Why don't you save us too if you're the Son of God?" "Don't you fear God at all?" asked the other. "We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man has done nothing wrong. He's innocent." Then he turned his face to Jesus and whispered, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus looked into his eyes and said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Then Jesus saw Mary, his mother, standing there at the foot of his cross, and beside her was one of his closest friends, John. "Woman," he said, struggling to breathe, "there is your son." And to John he said, "There is your mother." John looked after Mary from that day onward, taking her to live with him and his family. At about 12 noon, the sun vanished into the rolling blackness of the clouds. Thick darkness came over the whole land, and all the people watching, including the soldiers, were filled with terror. It was as if the whole world had come to an end. Suddenly, Jesus cried out, "Father, Father, I am giving you my spirit. And with one last agonizing breath, he shouted, "It is finished." His body hung down dead, and at that moment, a great storm shook the whole city of Jerusalem. The wind howled through the sky, rocks were split open, and the great veil which separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple was ripped apart. The centurion in charge of the crucifixion looked at Jesus in fear and amazement. So this man really was God's son, he proclaimed.
Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come
Secret disciples, John 19. Pilate had watched the storm and the darkness fall over Jerusalem and was sitting alone in his palace. He wanted nothing more to do with Jesus, nor did he want anyone to mention his name ever again. At that moment, a servant ushered in two men. The first, dressed in fine clothes, was a rich merchant named Joseph from the town of Arimathea. The second was a Pharisee, Nicodemus. He was the one who had visited Jesus secretly by night. Joseph spoke first. We are disciples. That is, we did not follow Jesus openly, but now, Joseph hesitated, then took courage. We would like to give him a decent burial. I have a tomb carved in the rock face of a garden outside the city. Your own tomb? Said Pilate, astonished. Prepared for the day of my own death, said Joseph, his eyes lowered to the ground. I would like to bury him there. You want my permission to take down the body from the cross? Asked Pilate. We know that bodies of criminals are left to hang for many days, but please let us bury him. Pilate shook his head in wonder. Followers of a dead leader, he said. What next? He swept away from them, calling out, Go ahead, have the body.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble. Were you there
the burial. Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, and John 19. Joseph and Nicodemus walked out of the city and up to the hill of Golgotha, where the body of Jesus was still hanging upon the cross. Around him were women weeping: Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Salome, the mother of James and John, and others. Slowly and with the greatest care, the two men took out the cruel nails and lifted the body down. They wrapped Jesus in the linen shroud which Nicodemus had brought with him. Then they carried the body to the garden where a tomb had been cut into the rock. There they laid Jesus down on the cold shell of stone in the darkness of the grave. The men heaved the great round boulder along its groove so that it rolled in front of the tomb and stood there, sealing the entrance. Finally, the little band of mourners left the garden reluctantly, left Jesus behind. It seemed forever, and wandered down the long path into the city of Jerusalem.
Oh, sacred head, now wounded, with grief and shame weighed down, now scornfully surrounded, with thorns thine only crown. How pale thou art with anguish, with sore abuse and scorn. How does that visage languish, which once was bright as morn? What thou, my Lord, hast suffered was all for sinners' gain. Mine was the transgression, but thine the deadly pain. Lo, here I fall, my Savior, 'tis I deserve thy place. Look on me with thy favor, vouchsafe me to thy grace. Matondo kwange, matondo kwange, matondo kwange, matondo kwange. What a lame.
We do indeed approach your throne of grace with boldness, O God, and there receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. We give you thanks for Jesus, who throughout his life offered up prayers and supplications on behalf of the least of those among your people. He suffered and died amid the city's garbage and made of that filth sacred ground. Henceforth, nothing within your creation can be considered off limits of your care and concern. You heed the calls of those who are aimless and lost. They feel forsaken and are anxious of what awaits them. Provide them with your providence that will point them toward safe havens where they can rest from their tensions, gain strength to pursue, further their journeys, and find directions towards beneficial destinies. There are those imprisoned within walls of their own making and confinements over which they have had no control. As Jesus descended into Sheol to rescue those caught in the throes of their own hell, so send your sacrificial Son as their source of salvation. Help them to find in your comforting spirit the assurance that you continue to care for them and the promise that you will consider their plight. Those whom the world considers little more than garbage henceforth hold a hallowed place in your heart. Help us likewise not to forsake them, but follow the example of our high priest, who is able to sympathize with all of our weaknesses. Make us bold to reach out to them. Consider them sisters and brother in covenant with Christ, and henceforth pledge ourselves to walk with them toward dignity and self-worth. For in so doing, we shall ourselves bear that cross Jesus bore on behalf of us all. And now, joining our voices together, let us pray the prayer that you taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
They crucified my Lord, and he never said a mumbling word. They crucified my Lord, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word. They pierced him in his side, and he never said a mumbling word. They pierced him in his side, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word. They nailed him to a tree, and he never said a mumbling word. They nailed him to a tree, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word. He bowed his head and died, and he never said a mumbling word. He bowed his head and died, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word.
I served an unapproachable God. While I served the high priest that served an unapproachable God. But everything changed in that one night. Everything changed in one night. I was drugged to the garden, and then my ear... I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I was there in the garden with Judas. Judas knew exactly where Jesus was going to be, and we were all there waiting for him. It was crazy that night. His disciples were with him, but I saw Jesus. I was very close to Jesus, and you could tell he was visibly upset. And Judas kisses Jesus on the cheek, and I was standing so close that I heard Jesus call Judas friend. And that's the last thing I heard, because in moments later I heard nothing. I saw the flash of a blade come toward my face, and I felt blood streaming down. And then it got quiet. And then I got dizzy. And then Jesus, he touched me. Like I said, I heard all the stories about Jesus, and I've heard all the stories about how Jesus healed people with his hands. There was this one time he healed a person with dirt and spit. And so many people, he just healed them with his hands, but it wasn't his hands for me. It was the way he looked at me. It was his eyes. That's what broke me. His eyes were filled with compassion and grief and joy. And when he pulled his hand away, my ear, that night, everything I heard about that man had changed forever. They had a mock trial for him. The whole night was just set up to condemn him. And he didn't say a word. He just felt sorry for us. There was the sentencing, there was Pilate, the crucifixion, and then there was an earthquake. And then the veil. I was in the temple when the veil was ripped in half. Do you know what that means? Even I knew what that meant. God had invited us all in. The unapproachable God was now approachable. God was on the move.